Sewa, what are you doing here?
I'm your wife. Did you forget, or did you just hope I would?
You're marrying her too, Kwabena. This isn't a request. Father, I already have a wife.
In the Owusu family, silence was not peace. It was a weapon, and Amasewa was about to learn that the loudest lies are the ones nobody says out loud. If you are watching this from anywhere in the world, type your city in the comments and let's see how far this story travels before it ends. Every morning in Nsuta, before the roosters had even finished arguing with the sunrise, Amasewa was already awake. She did not need an alarm. 4 years of marriage had taught her body a rhythm. Boil the water, sweep the porch, prepare breakfast, then sit at her sewing table before the heat of the day made the fabric stick to her fingers. She was 27 years old, and though she was not the loudest woman in the market, everyone who wore her stitching knew her hands carried something rare. Patience, sewn into every seam. A small shop, Sewa Designs, sat on a quiet street behind the church, with 2 sewing machines, a mirror with a chipped corner, and a death notebook wrapped carefully in plastic, the way people protect things they cannot afford to lose. Kwabena Owusu was the kind of man who filled the room before he even opened his mouth. 32 years old, tall, well-dressed, the second son of Opanyin Kofi Owusu, a name known across 3 regions for its cocoa warehouses and real estate holdings. Kwabena sold houses and land for his father's company, and he was good at it because he had learned early that people buy trust before they buy anything else. He had married Ama 4 years ago against his father's quiet disapproval, because back then, Ama's father still owned a modest transport business, and Opanyin Owusu had once respected that family. But businesses fail. Ama's father's transport company collapsed 2 years into the marriage, and something in the Owusu household shifted after that, quietly, the way weather changes before anyone notices the sky. And then there was Opanyin Kofi Owusu, Kwabena's father, 60 years old, a man who did not raise his voice because he never needed to. In Nsuta, when Opanyin Owusu walked into a room, conversations lowered themselves out of respect or fear, depending on who you asked. He had built his fortune from cocoa exports in the years when the trade was unforgiving, and he believed deeply that a family's wealth was not something you protected with sentiment. It was something you protected with strategy. To Opanyin Owusu, marriage was never just about love. It was about alliances. And for 2 years now, he had been quietly building one, a business partnership so valuable that he was willing to risk his own son's marriage to secure it. He simply had not told anyone that part yet. Not even Kwabena, not fully, not at first. On the surface, Ama and Kwabena's marriage looked steady. They had no children yet, which the family whispered about more than they should have. But Hama told herself that children would come when God decided it was time. What she could not explain away so easily were the small things. The way Kwabena's phone had started staying face down on the table. The way he now took calls outside under the mango tree, his voice dropping the moment he saw her near the window. The way his visits to his father's house in Kumasi had doubled in the last 3 months, each one lasting longer than the one before. Ama noticed these things, the way a seamstress notices a loose thread. Not alarming on its own, but worth watching because a loose thread rarely stays a small problem for long. Auntie Aqua had sold fabric at Kejetia Market for over 25 years, long enough to read a person's face faster than she could read a price tag. She was Ama's mother's younger sister, and since Ama's own mother had passed 6 years earlier, Auntie Aqua had quietly stepped into that role without ever announcing it. One Thursday evening, she stopped by Amma's shop with a bag of plantains and dried fish, the way she always did, and found her niece aunt stitching a hem with tired eyes, and a colder bowl of soup beside her than any wife should have to eat alone. Has that man been going to Kumasi again? Auntie Aqua asked, not even bothering with a greeting first. Amma did not look up from her sewing. His father needs him for business, Auntie. It is normal. Auntie Aqua sat down slowly, watching her niece's trembling fingers work at the needle. Normal business does not make a man's eyes avoid his wife's face, she said. I have sold cloth to enough dishonest men's mistresses to know what a guilty household smells like, Amma. And this one is starting to smell like trouble. That same evening, in a private study in Kumasi, Opanyin Kofi Owusu sat across from his son with 2 glasses of palm wine untouched between them. The Mensah family has agreed, the old man said, tapping his walking stick once against the floor, the way he always did when he wanted a sentence to land with weight. Efua's father wants the export partnership finalized before the next harvest season. He wants it sealed properly, Kwabena. Not just with paperwork, with family. Kwabena rubbed the back of his neck, the way he always did when his stomach disagreed with his mouth. Father, I already have a wife. Opanyin Owusu did not raise his voice. He never did. Our tradition allows more than one wife, Kwabena. I am not asking you to abandon Amma. I am asking you to think about what this family will become in 10 years if we let sentiment stand in the way of opportunity. Efwa is young, respectable, and her father controls half the cocoa export routes in this region. This is not a request, my son. This is survival. Kwabena looked at the untouched glass of palm wine for a long moment before finally lifting it. And somewhere across town, Amma was still sitting at her sewing table, humming softly to herself, completely unaware that her marriage had just been discussed like a business deed. Efua Mensah was 24 years old, and if you asked anyone in Kumasi's business circles, they would tell you she was the kind of daughter every wealthy family hoped for. Educated abroad, soft-spoken, but sharp enough to sit in on her father's export meetings without anyone questioning why she was there. She had met Kwabena 3 months earlier at a business dinner her father hosted, and she had liked him immediately, not because of his father's wealth, but because he had asked her real questions about her studies instead of simply admiring her dress. What Efua did not know, because no one had told her, was that the charming man who complimented her ideas about sustainable farming already wore a wedding ring in a drawer at home, one he had quietly stopped wearing 3 weeks ago, right around the time his visits to Kumasi doubled. Back in Nsuta, Amma was folding laundry when her hand brushed against something hard inside Kwabena's trouser pocket. She pulled it out, expecting coins or a receipt. Instead, she found nothing because the ring was not in his pocket. It was already gone from his finger, and she had not noticed because a woman does not check her husband's hand every single day. She only notices the day the habit of looking finally catches up to her. That night at dinner, she reached for his hand out of old habit, the way she always did before Grace. Her fingers closed around his, and something in her chest went quiet and cold before her mind even understood why. Kwabena, she said slowly, still holding his hand under the table. Where is your ring? He did not pull his hand away. That would have been too obvious, and Kwabena was many things, but careless was not usually one of them. I took it off at the site today, he said, his voice even. The workers were mixing cement. I did not want to damage it. Amma nodded slowly and let go of his hand. She wanted so badly for that to be the whole truth. but her fingers remembered something her mind was still refusing to accept. A groove. A faint tan line where metal should have been for 4 straight years. And that groove had already started to fade. Amma told herself it was cement dust. She told herself it was nothing. She had told herself so many small comforting lies over the last few months that she had almost become fluent in her own denial. But that night, long after Kwabena had fallen asleep, Amma lay awake staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in 4 years of marriage, a single terrifying thought crossed her mind and refused to leave. What if the thing she was most afraid of was not a secret her husband was keeping from strangers, but a secret her husband's entire family had already agreed to keep from her? She did not know yet how right she was. She did not know that 30 kilometers away, in a bright living room in Kumasi, Efua Mensah was writing Kwabena's name in a notebook beside the word engagement, with a small hopeful heart drawn next to it. If you want to see how far this lie goes before it breaks, stay with me, because part 2 is where the whole family's secret finally starts to crack open. Mami Abena also had not slept properly in 3 weeks, not since her husband had told her, in the same calm voice he used to discuss cocoa prices, that Kwabena would be taking a second wife before the year's end. She had not argued with Opanyin Hosu. In 32 years of marriage, she had learned that arguing with him only delayed his plans. It never stopped them. But guilt, real guilt, does not care whether a woman argues or stays silent. It settles into the chest anyway. Every time Amma visited the family house with a plate of food or a new outfit she had sewn as a gift, Mami Abena found herself unable to hold her daughter-in-law's eyes for more than a few seconds. "You are quiet today, mother," Amma said one afternoon, setting down a beautifully wrapped kente stole she had made for her mother-in-law's birthday. Mami Abena took the gift with trembling hands and said only, "God will forgive us all for the things we allowed to happen in our own houses." Amma laughed softly, thinking it was simply an old woman's proverb. She had no idea it was closer to a confession than a compliment. Yo, Amma's younger brother, was 20 years old and studying business administration at Kwame Nkrumah University. The kind of young man who trusted very little that he had not personally verified himself. One evening, scrolling through Instagram between classes, he paused on a photo posted by Efua Mensah, a group picture from a business dinner 3 months earlier. He almost scrolled past it until his eyes caught a familiar face standing just behind Efua's shoulder, smiling in a navy shirt he recognized immediately, because his own sister had ironed that exact shirt more times than he could count. Yours sat up straight in his dormitory chair. He zoomed in on the photo. He zoomed in again. Then he did what any careful young man would do before alarming his family with an accusation. He scrolled through Efua Mensah's entire public profile, page by page, looking for more, and what he found made his stomach turn cold. Comments from Efua's friends under a recent photo, teasing her about a certain businessman who kept visiting her father's office. A photo from 2 weeks ago showing Efua laughing beside Kwabena at what looked unmistakably like a formal introduction dinner, the kind families held when a serious proposal was already in motion. Yo did not sleep that night. By morning, he had taken a 2-hour trotro ride back to Nsuta, arriving at his sister's shop before she had even finished sweeping the doorway. "Sister," he said, standing in the doorway, phone still in his hand, "I need to show you something, and I need you to stay calm while I do it." Amma laughed, setting down her broom. "Yo, you sound like you're about to tell me the government has collapsed." He did not laugh back. That was when Amma's stomach dropped, because her brother had always been the funny one. the one who turned even bad news into a joke. And today his face carried none of that lightness. He handed her the phone in silence. Amma looked at the photograph for a long time. She recognized the navy shirt. She recognized the smile, the same practice charm he wore for every client who ever bought a plot of land from him. And she recognized with a slow sinking horror that the young woman standing beside him in the photo was looking up at him the way a woman looks at a man she believes belongs only to her. Maybe it's a work event, Amma said quietly, though her voice had already started to shake. Yor took the phone back gently. Sister, I checked. This is not a work event. Read the caption again. The caption, written by one of Efua's friends, read simply, "So happy for you, Efua, meeting the in-laws officially next month, and then the big day after the cocoa harvest. He is a good man, and Opanyin Owusu clearly adores you already." Amma read it 3 times. Each time, the words rearranged themselves slightly in her mind, as if her brain kept hoping a different sentence would appear if she looked hard enough. Opanyin Owusu. Her own father-in-law's name, written casually in a stranger's comment, celebrating a wedding that was apparently already being planned, complete with a date tied to the cocoa harvest season. The same season Opanyin Owusu had been mentioning constantly at every family dinner for the last 2 months. Amma sat down slowly on the wooden stool by her sewing machine. "He adores you already," she repeated out loud, her voice hollow. "That is my father-in-law they are talking about. My father-in-law is planning a wedding for my husband, and I am sewing his mother a birthday gift like a fool who does not even know she's being replaced." Yor expected his sister to cry or scream or throw something the way their mother might have done years ago. Instead, Amma stood up, wiped her hands on her apron, and picked her broom back up from where she had left it. "Sister, are you not going to say something? Call him? Call the father?" Amma shook her head slowly, sweeping the doorway with steady, deliberate strokes. "If I call him now, he will have 3 weeks to prepare a lie, good enough to make me doubt what I just saw with my own eyes. I have watched this family my whole marriage. They do not panic, they plan. If I want the truth, I cannot fight them with anger. I have to fight them with patience. The same patience they have been using against me this whole time, except this time, I will be the one collecting proof, not the one being fooled by it." Yor looked at his sister with something between worry and pride. "What do you want to do?" Amma finally stopped sweeping and looked at him, her eyes dry, but harder than he had ever seen them. "I want to know everything, the date, the place. Who else already knows? And then, when I have all of it, I am going to walk into that engagement myself, and I am going to let the truth stand there in front of everyone, the same way they let this lie stand in front of me for months." That evening, Amma did not go home to Kwabena. Instead, she went to her uncle, Nana Kojo, a calm, respected elder who had settled more family disputes in Nsuta than the local chief himself. Auntie Aqua was already there when Amma arrived, having heard the news from Yor on the Trotro ride back. Nana Kojo listened to the whole story without interrupting once, his fingers stippled beneath his chin, his expression unreadable. When Amma finished speaking, he removed his glasses slowly and cleaned them with the edge of his cloth, a habit everyone in the family recognized as his way of buying time before saying something serious. "Opanyin Owusu is not a foolish man," Nana Kojo finally said. "If he has kept this hidden for months, he has also prepared for the possibility that it might be discovered. We cannot go to him with suspicion alone, Amma. We need proof strong enough that even his silver tongue cannot talk his way around it. And we need to know exactly when this engagement dinner is happening, Because if we move too early, they will simply postpone it and hide it somewhere new. If we move too late, it will already be done. Auntie Aqua folded her arms and looked at her niece with fierce protective eyes. Then we move exactly on time. No more, no less. And Amma will not go there as a broken wife begging for answers. She will go there as a woman who already knows the truth and simply needs the room to catch up. When Amma finally returned home that night, close to 11, Kwabena was pacing the living room, his phone in his hand, relief flooding his face the moment she walked through the door. "Where were you? I called you 6 times. Amma set her back down calmly, her face arranged into the same composed mask she had practiced in the mirror at her uncle's house. "I was with Auntie Hakua. She needed help with a wedding order." It was technically not a lie. Kwabena studied her face for a moment. The way a man studies a contract he is not entirely sure he trusts, then seemed to relax. "I was worried," he said, stepping closer, reaching for her hand. Amma let him take it. Her fingers did not shake this time, though everything inside her chest was screaming. "You are always so busy lately," she said softly, watching his face carefully. "Business is good?" Kwabena smiled, the same practiced smile he gave his clients. "Business has never been better, Sewa. My father says this next season is going to change everything for this family." Hama smiled back, and for the first time in her marriage, she understood exactly how much truth could hide inside a sentence that was technically not a single lie. Over the next 2 weeks, Amma became someone she had never needed to be before, a quiet investigator inside Okon marriage. She kept a small notebook, the same kind she used for customer orders, except now the entries were different. The date, Kwabena said he was checking a construction site, but his shoes came home without a single speck of cement dust. The evening his phone buzzed with a message from a contact saved simply as E, and he stepped outside so quickly he forgot to lock the screen behind him, giving Amma just enough time to see the words, "Can't wait to officially meet your mother next month," before the screen went dark again. Auntie Aqua walked her own network at Kejetia Market, where gossip traveled faster than any newspaper, and confirmed through a fabric supplier who had recently sold expensive kente to the Mensah family that an engagement dinner was indeed being planned for the 3rd Saturday of the following month at the Mensah family's lakeside property outside Kumasi. Nana Kojo, meanwhile, quietly confirmed through an old friend on the local chief's council that Opanin Owusu had in fact requested a customary blessing for a new family alliance just 2 weeks earlier, careful never to specify whose alliance it was. While Amma gathered proof of her own unraveling marriage, 30 kilometers away, Efua Mensah was choosing fabric for her engagement outfit, laughing with her mother over samples of gold and green kente spread across the dining table. "Kwabena says his mother is a wonderful woman," Efua said, holding a swatch of fabric up to the light. "He says she will love you," her mother replied, smiling. "And his father has already spoken so highly of this alliance to your father." "Efua, I have not seen you this happy in a long time." Efua smiled down at the fabric, thinking of a man who asked thoughtful questions about her studies, who had never once, in 3 months of courtship, mentioned that he already had a wife waiting for him in a small tailoring shop in Nsuta. She had no reason to ask, because no one, not Kwabena, not his father, not even the family friends who had helped arrange the introduction, had given her any reason to doubt that this was anything other than the beginning of her own happy story. By the end of the 2nd week, Amma's small notebook held everything she needed: the date, the location, the confirmation from 3 separate sources that could not possibly have coordinated a lie together. She sat at her sewing table late one night, staring at the notebook the way she once stared at wedding dress patterns, except this time She was not designing a beautiful day for someone else. She was designing the exact moment she intended to make sure no one in that family could look away from the truth. 3 weeks, she whispered to herself. 3 weeks, and then everyone will know exactly what kind of family they married into. She had no idea that in 3 weeks, she would not only expose a wedding built on lies, she would also finally learn why Opanyin Owusu had been so desperate to secure this particular alliance in the first place, a reason far darker than simple business ambition. If you want to know what Amma uncovers next, stay with me, because part 3 is where this family's secret gets even bigger than anyone expected. What Amma did not yet know, and what even Kwabena did not fully understand, was that his father's business was not as strong as the family's reputation suggested. 2 years earlier, Opanyin Owusu had taken a large loan against the cocoa warehouses to expand into a shipping contract that had since collapsed under new export taxes. He had quietly been making minimum payments ever since, terrified that word of the debt would reach the very families whose respect had built his empire in the first place. The Mensah family's shipping routes were not simply a convenient business opportunity. They were the only realistic way for Opanyin Owusu to move his remaining cocoa stock out of the country before the bank restructured his loan into something the family could never recover from. A marriage between Kwabena and Efua was not, as he had told his son, simply about growing the family's wealth. It was about saving it from a quiet collapse that Opanyin Owusu had been holding together with charm, reputation, and increasingly desperate silence. Amma learned this piece of the truth almost by accident. Nana Kojo's old friend on the chief's council, a retired bank manager named Mr. Ajay, mentioned it in passing while confirming the customary blessing request. Opanyin Owusu asked me quietly months ago whether a marriage alliance could be arranged quickly enough to satisfy a certain financial deadline. Mr. Aji said, lowering his voice, even though they were alone in Nana Kojo's compound. I did not ask for details, but a man does not rush an alliance like this unless something is chasing him. Amma sat very still when Nana Kojo relayed this to her that evening. Somehow, this new information hurt differently than the affair itself. It was one thing to learn her husband's family had planned a second marriage to grow their wealth. It was another thing entirely to learn that her entire 4 years of marriage, her sacrifices, her patience, her quiet loyalty had simply been the calm before a storm her father-in-law had known was coming the entire time, and had never once warned her about, because warning her was never part of his plan. Kwabena was not entirely at peace with his father's plan either, though he had told himself for months that peace was a luxury he could not afford while the family's future hung in the balance. Late one night, alone in his car outside the construction site he had actually visited that day, he sat with his phone in his hand, scrolling through old photographs of his wedding to Hama 4 years earlier, and laughing under a canopy of white flowers, a hand resting on his chest as if she trusted him with something more fragile than either of them had understood at the time. He thought about Efua, kind and unsuspecting, and the version of himself that had let her fall for a man who was not fully honest about who he already belonged to. He thought about his father's voice, calm and certain, insisting this was simply how serious families secured their future. For the first time in months, Kwabena allowed himself one honest thought, quickly buried beneath the comfort of obedience. This was not survival. This was cowardice, wearing his father's expensive kente. With the truth fully assembled, Amma, Auntie Aqua, and Nana Kojo sat together one final time before the engagement dinner, 3 weeks away, exactly as the notebook had promised. Nana Kojo laid out his plan with the same calm precision he brought to every family dispute he had ever settled. "We do not storm in with shouting," he said. "Shouting only lets people call you hysterical and dismiss what you say. We go in with evidence, calmly presented, exactly the way a respected family should confront wrongdoing." He suggested Amma request, through Auntie Aqua's market connections, to be hired as part of the event's outfit and decoration team, since the Mensah family, like most wealthy families preparing a large ceremony, would need extra hands for last-minute alterations and setup. No one at that dinner would know her real connection to the groom until the exact moment she chose to reveal it. Auntie Aqua smiled grimly at the plan. A seamstress fixing loose seams at her own husband's second engagement. There is a kind of justice in that, Amma, whether you intended it or not. In the final days before the engagement, Amma prepared the way she always prepared for any important task, with quiet, methodical care. She printed the screenshots Yo had gathered from Efwa's social media. She kept the notebook with every date and detail written in her own careful handwriting. She retrieved her marriage certificate from the metal box under her bed, the same certificate she had once signed with trembling, hopeful hands. She folded her own outfit for the day, deliberately simple, a plain but elegant brown dress and cream head wrap, nothing that would draw attention before she wanted it drawn. And on the morning of the engagement, she packed her sewing kit last, the same kit she had carried to 100 other people's happiest days. This time, she told herself, tightening the final strap on her bag, she was not going to stitch someone else's joy together. She was going to unpick a lie that had been sewn together far too carefully by people who had forgotten that even the finest embroidery unravels the moment someone finds the right thread to pull. The morning of the engagement dinner arrived exactly as the notebook had predicted, bright and warm, with the kind of golden Kumasi sunlight that made every wedding photograph look like a blessing already granted. At the Mensah family's lakeside property, workers had spent the entire previous day preparing the grounds. Kente fabric draped elegantly along the entrance, white and gold flowers arranged in careful clusters, a red carpet leading from the gate toward a canopy overlooking the water. Efwa stood in the bridal preparation room, a mother adjusting beads around her neck, while aunties teased her gently about the happiness waiting for her. Across town, Kwabena stood in front of a mirror in his father's house, adjusting a rich kente cloth draped over his shoulder, his father standing behind him with quiet pride. "Today, everything we have built finally becomes permanent," Opanin Howusu said, resting a hand on his son's shoulder. Kwabena looked at his own reflection and for just a moment did not recognize the man staring back at him. Amma arrived at the venue just after 8 in the morning, dressed simply, carrying her sewing kit, blending easily into the small army of decorators, caterers, and outfit assistants moving briskly across the lakeside grounds. The event coordinator, a busy woman named Adwoa, handed her a small identification tag that read only Seamstress Support Team and pointed her toward the changing area near the back of the canopy. "The Mensah family is very particular," Adwoa said, without looking up from her clipboard. "If any guest needs a hem fixed, a head wrap adjusted, anything at all, you handle it quickly and quietly. Today, nothing can go wrong." Amma nodded and said nothing else, tucking the irony of that sentence deep into her chest, where it sat beside every other painful truth she had carried silently for the past 4 years. She moved through the growing crowd of decorators and caterers with the practiced calm of a woman who had spent her whole life making other people's important days look effortless, while carrying, this time, a bag full of evidence heavy enough to end one. Just before 10:30, Amma caught her first real glimpse of Efua Mensah stepping out from the bridal preparation tent in a stunning yellow and gold kente outfit, her face glowing with the particular nervous joy of a woman who believes completely that she is walking into the happiest chapter of her life. Amma had expected, if she was honest with herself, to feel anger the moment she finally saw this woman in person. Instead, watching Efua laugh softly at something her mother whispered in her ear, Amma felt something far more complicated settle in her chest. This young woman was not a villain. She was, in almost every way that mattered, exactly what Amma herself had once been 4 years earlier. Hopeful, trusting, and standing inside a beautifully decorated lie that other people had built around her, brick by careful brick, without ever once asking whether she deserved to know the truth before stepping inside it. By 11:15, the traditional drums began, deep and rhythmic, echoing across the lehik as the groom's procession approached the canopy. Guests rose to their feet, clapping and singing, the entire venue swelling with the particular joyful noise of a community celebrating an alliance it believed was built on nothing but good fortune. Amma stood near the changing area, pinning a loose-haired wrap for an elderly guest, her hand steady even as her heart pounded harder with every step of the approaching drums. She recognized the rhythm of his walk before she even lifted her eyes, the same confident, unhurried stride she had watched cross 1,000 doorways over 4 years of marriage. Kwabena Owusu walked in beneath the sound of celebration, dressed in a rich wine, red and gold kente, the same watch on his wrist that Amma had once saved 3 months of extra sewing orders to buy him as an anniversary gift. He did not see her yet. He was too busy smiling, shaking hands, bowing respectfully to elders, performing the role of a devoted groom with the same effortless charm he brought to selling a plot of land. Amma set down the head wrap she had been pinning, her hands finally steady after weeks of practicing exactly this moment in her mind. She watched Kwabena take his position beneath the canopy beside his beaming father, watched Efua step forward in a golden kente to stand beside the man both of them believed belonged fully to her. The elder from the bride's family rose to begin the opening blessing, his voice carrying warmly over the water, praying that this union would be built on truth, respect, and unwavering honesty between two families. Amma closed her eyes for a single breath, her sewing kit hanging steady at her side, the folder of evidence tucked safely inside her bag. When she opened her eyes again, she was no longer a wife hiding in the background of her husband's betrayal. She was a woman about to walk directly into the center of it. If you want to see exactly how Amma chooses to reveal the truth in front of both families, in front of the elders, in front of the man who once promised her forever, stay with me. Because part 4 is where everything this family tried so carefully to hide finally comes into the light. The elder finished his opening blessing, and the crowd murmured their agreement, glasses of schnapps being lifted in the traditional exchange between families. It was exactly the moment Nana Kojo had told her to wait for. The pause between ceremony and celebration, when everyone's guard was lowered and every eye was still fixed politely on the canopy. Amma walked forward, not quickly, not dramatically, but with the same steady, unhurried pace she used when approaching a bride who needed a final fitting before walking down the aisle. Adwoa, the event coordinator, noticed her first and frowned in confusion, since no seamstress had been called for. But Hema did not stop at the edge of the canopy the way a staff member should have. She walked directly beneath it, standing between the two families, a sewing kit still hanging from her shoulder, a folder of evidence held steady in both her hands. The drummers, sensing something wrong before they understood what, let their rhythm falter and fade into silence. Kwabena's smile vanished. The instant his eyes found her. For a full 3 seconds, he simply stared, his mouth slightly open, his mind visibly searching for an explanation his tongue was not fast enough to produce. Sewa, he finally managed, his voice cracking on the single syllable of her name. What are you doing here? Amma looked at him, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of everything she had carried silently. The loose ring groove on his finger. The phone turned face down. The caption that had announced a wedding she was never invited to. I was hired, she said calmly, her voice carrying clearly across the now silent canopy, to fix loose seams. It seems there is a much bigger one here than anyone thought to mention to me. Opanyin Owusu's face, usually so composed, flickered with something close to alarm, before he quickly rearranged it into calm authority, stepping forward with his walking stick as if sheer presence alone could still control the room. Efwa stepped closer, a golden kente catching the sunlight, her earlier glow now replaced by a slowly dawning confusion. Kwabena, she said quietly, her eyes moving between him and the calm, unfamiliar woman standing so confidently beneath their canopy. Do you know this woman? Kwabena opened his mouth, but no sound came out immediately, and in that silence, Amma answered for him. My name is Amma Sewa, she said, turning to face Efua directly, her voice gentle despite everything, because whatever pain she carried, she had promised herself she would not aim it at another woman who had done nothing wrong. I am Kwabena's wife. We have been married 4 years. The words landed across the canopy like a stone dropped into still water, rippling outward through the crowd in a wave of gasps and whispered disbelief. Efwa's hand rose slowly to cover her mouth, her eyes filling instantly with tears, not of anger yet, but of the particular shock that arrives just before anger finds its footing. Mr. Mensah, Efwa's father, stepped forward, his face hardening with the particular fury of a man realizing his family's honor had been quietly gambled with. Is this true? He demanded, looking directly at Opanyin Owusu, whose composure had begun, for the first time in years, to visibly crack. Before Opanyin Owusu could construct a careful answer, Nana Kojo stepped out from the crowd of guests, calm and unhurried, exactly as he had promised Amma he would, standing beside his niece with quiet, dignified authority. I am Amma's uncle, he said, addressing Mr. Mensah with respectful directness. We did not come here to disgrace your daughter or your family, sir. We came because your family deserved to know the truth before it was too late to matter. He nodded to Amma, who opened her folder and handed it, with both hands, respectfully, to Mr. Mensah, the way a younger person offers something important to an elder. Inside were copies of the marriage certificate, printed screenshots of the engagement announcement, and a photograph of Kwabena's bare ring finger, dated weeks before he had ever met Efua's family. Opanyin Owusu straightened his back, gripping his walking stick tightly, and attempted one last time to steer the room back toward the calm authority he had spent 60 years cultivating. This is a family matter that has already been discussed privately, he said, his voice carefully even. Our tradition allows a man to take more than one wife. There is no deception here, only a business arrangement that benefits both of our families. Mr. Mensah's expression darkened further. You call marrying my daughter into a household that already has a wife without a single word to me or to her a business arrangement. You call hiding a debt so large that you needed my shipping routes to survive it and dressing that desperation up as an honor to my family tradition. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, and for the first time, Amma watched something she had never once seen in 4 years of marriage. Her father-in-law, the man whose calm voice had commanded entire rooms without ever needing to raise itself, standing utterly speechless in front of people it could no longer control. While the two fathers argued, Amma turned quietly to Efua, who stood trembling, tears streaking down her carefully applied makeup. The golden kente that had felt like a promise, an hour earlier now feeling like a costume in a story she never agreed to be part of. "I did not come here to shame you," Amma said softly, her voice meant only for the two of them, despite the noise surrounding them. "When I saw you this morning, laughing with your mother, I understood you were exactly what I once was, a woman trusting people who never planned to be honest with her." Efwa wiped her eyes, her voice shaking. "Did you know? Before today, did you know about me?" Amma shook her head. "Not until 3 weeks ago. And when I found out, I had a choice to stay silent and let you walk into this the way they let me walk into 4 years of not knowing, or to make sure at least one of us got to choose her own future with the truth in front of her." Efwa looked at her for a long moment, then reached out and, to the surprise of everyone watching, took Amma's hand. "Thank you," she whispered, "for choosing me too, even though you did not have to." It was Mami Abina, standing quietly near the edge of the canopy, who finally broke her own silence. She stepped forward, her hands trembling, her eyes finally meeting Amma's directly for what felt like the first time in months. "I knew," she said, her voice carrying across the stunned crowd, loud enough for everyone to hear, though clearly costing her everything to say. "I have known for months, and I said nothing because I was afraid of my husband's anger more than I was brave enough to protect my daughter-in-law's heart. Amma, I am sorry. Not because you found out, but because it took you standing here in front of everyone for me to finally find the courage to say it." Amma looked at her mother-in-law, and though the hurt of months of silence did not simply dissolve at a single apology, something in her chest loosened slightly. The particular relief of finally hearing someone in that family speak a plain, undecorated truth instead of another carefully managed excuse. Mr. Mensah turned to the gathered families, his voice firm and final. "This engagement is cancelled," he announced, the words falling over the crowd like a verdict. "The Mensah family will not build an alliance on deception, no matter how urgently that deception was needed. Any gifts exchanged will be returned, and any conversation about shipping routes or business partnerships ends here, today, along with this ceremony." Kwabena, who had said almost nothing since Ama's arrival, finally found his voice, turning toward her with something that looked almost like desperation. "Sewa, please, can we not discuss this privately? Do not end things like this in front of everyone." Amma looked at him for a long, quiet moment, weighing 4 years of memories against the last 3 weeks of discovered truth. "You did not think of privacy when you took off your ring," she said finally, a voice steady. "You did not think of privacy when you let your father plan a wedding for you like a business did. I am not ending this in front of everyone. Kwabena. You ended it the moment you decided I did not deserve to know the truth before everyone else did." Amma did not wait to watch the rest of the fallout unfold. The furious whispered arguments between the two families. The security staff quietly escorting a pale and silent Opanyin Owusu toward the parking area. The photographers lowering their cameras because there was nothing left worth capturing that the family would ever want remembered. She simply picked up her sewing kit, nodded once to Nana Kojo and Auntie Akua, and walked calmly back through the same path she had entered by, past decorators who now watched her with a mixture of shock and quiet respect, past flowers that had been arranged for a celebration that would never happen. At the edge of the property, she paused for a moment beside the lake, watching the water catch the afternoon light, and allowed herself finally the first real tears she had permitted since Yor first showed her that photograph 3 weeks earlier. They were not tears of defeat. They were the particular release of a woman who had carried a secret's weight silently for far too long, finally setting it down in a place where it could no longer follow her home. In the weeks that followed, the story of the cancelled engagement spread quickly through Kumasi's business circles, the way scandal always travels faster than success ever does. The Mensah family formally ended all shipping negotiations, and without that lifeline, Opani Owusu's loan restructured into terms the family could not sustain. Warehouses once filled with cocoa stocks sat half empty. As creditors began asking uncomfortable questions, the old man could no longer charm his way around. Kwabena, stripped of the business connections his father had built his own career upon, found himself, for the first time in his adult life, having to prove his worth without his family's name doing the convincing for him. He came to Hama's shop one rainy evening, thinner than she remembered, his confidence visibly worn down by months of consequences finally arriving at his door. "I lost everything," he said quietly, standing just outside the doorway, unwilling to step inside without permission. Amma looked at him from behind a sewing machine, and for the first time in this entire story, she felt something close to peace rather than pain. "I am sorry, Sewa," Kwabena said, his voice barely audible over the rain. "I let my father's plans matter more than your trust. I understand now what that cost you and what it cost me." Amma set down her sewing, walked to the doorway, but did not invite him inside. "I do not hate you, Kwabena," she said, and she meant it. The anger of the last few months having settled, over time, into something quieter and far more permanent. "But I spent 4 years believing that loyalty meant staying silent about everything that hurts me. I am not willing to spend a single year more proving my love by disappearing a little more of myself every single day. You did not just plan a second marriage without telling me. You decided, somewhere along the way, that my feelings were the least important part of this entire family's plans. I cannot go back to being a woman who accepts that as normal, not even for you." Kwabena nodded slowly, understanding finally, arriving far too late to change anything. He turned and walked back into the rain, and Amma closed the door gently behind him, not in anger, but in the quiet, deliberate way a person closes a chapter they have finally finished reading. 6 months later, Sewa Designs had grown into something Amma had once only dared to imagine quietly at her old sewing table. With a small loan from Nana Kojo and steady support from Auntie Hakua's market connections, she expanded into a proper studio near the center of Insuta, hiring 4 young women, each one learning not just how to sew, but how to price their work fairly, save their earnings separately, and never again mistake quiet suffering for loyalty. Efua Mensah, surprisingly, had reached out to her 2 months after the cancelled engagement, and the 2 women, bonded by an experience neither would have chosen, but both had survived with dignity, had become unlikely friends, meeting occasionally for tea, comparing notes on rebuilding a life after discovering how easily trust could be arranged like a business deed. Mami Abena visited every Sunday now, no longer as a guilty mother-in-law seeking forgiveness, but simply as a woman who had learned late in life that love without honesty is only a beautifully wrapped kind of harm. There are families who build their strength on honesty, and there are families who build their strength on silence, mistaking secrecy for protection until the silence grows too heavy for anyone to carry alone. Ama Serwa did not win back her marriage. She won back something far more lasting. The understanding that she never needed anyone's permission to demand the truth, not her husband's, not her father-in-law's, not even her own fear of being called too suspicious, too demanding, too much. If this story taught you anything today, let it be this. A love that requires your silence is not protecting you. It is simply asking you to disappear quietly, one loose thread at a time, until there's nothing left of you for anyone to notice missing. Amma noticed, and she chose finally to stop letting anyone else hold the needle over her own life. If you enjoyed this story, tell me in the comments which moment hit you the hardest. The ring that quietly disappeared, or the mother-in-law who finally found her courage. And if you have not already, subscribe, because there are many more stories like Amma's waiting for you right here. Until next time, take care of yourselves and never let silence be mistaken for peace in your own home.